Hi everyone, this week we're in chapter 13 of Judges, looking at Samson, who is the last of Israel's judges and probably the most famous. We're only on week 5 of our studies, so it may seem a bit soon to get to the last judge. But we're going to spend 3 weeks looking at the life of Samson before we spend a couple of weeks on the conclusion of the book. Samson is the judge we're told most about. 4 chapters are devoted to his life. And that's because his life really sums up the entire message of the book of Judges. His story is a microcosm of the story of Israel at this time. He is the supreme example of everyone doing what is right in their own eyes. Some of you will know a bit about Samson. He is famous for both his unusual strength and his unwise relationship with Delilah. But there's a lot more that we need to see. So turn with me to Judges 13. Verse 1 tells us, "Again the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. So the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years." So we begin with the familiar cycle of Israel doing evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord handing them over to their enemies. This time it's the Philistines who oppress them for 40 years. There are a couple of things to note about the Philistines. Firstly, they were sophisticated. Their weapons, their buildings, their culture was all very impressive. Secondly, they were cruel. They built their empire through attacking and conquering other people groups. In the towns they captured, they would mutilate the men before torturing them and impaling them on poles. And thirdly, they were immoral. Their way of life was totally incompatible with that of God's chosen people. And Israel live alongside them, integrated into their unholy way of life and the worship of their gods. At the end of the period of the Judges, there's something missing from the cycle that we've seen repeated throughout the book. The Israelites have sinned and are oppressed by their enemies, but this time they do not cry out to God to deliver them before he sends a judge. It seems they are content to live under Philistine oppression. They've become used to it. They no longer see the foolishness of their choices. They no longer see their need of deliverance. But God does not wait for his people to see their need of salvation before he provides the way for them to be saved. He is committed to his covenant promise, and he will provide a deliverer for his people, whether they ask him to or not. Verse 2 takes us to an insignificant couple from the tribe of Dan. We're going to see again that God does not choose the most obvious person to deliver his people from the Philistines. So let's read from verse 2. "A certain man of Zorah named Manoa from the clan of the Danites had a wife who was childless, unable to give birth. The angel of the Lord appeared to her and said, 'You are barren and childless, but you are going to become pregnant and give birth to a son. Now see to it that you drink no wine or other fermented drink, and that you do not eat anything unclean. You will become pregnant and have a son whose head is never to be touched by a razor, because the boy is to be a Nazarite, dedicated to God from the womb. He will take the lead in delivering Israel from the hands of the Philistines.' Then the woman went to her husband and told him, 'A man of God came to me. He looked like an angel of God, very awesome. I didn't ask him where he came from, and he didn't tell me his name. But he said to me, "You will become pregnant and have a son. Now then, drink no wine or other fermented drink, and do not eat anything unclean, because the boy will be a Nazarite of God from the womb until the day of his death." This passage should feel a bit familiar to you. We're seeing a pattern that recurs throughout the Bible a birth announced by an angel to a barren woman. This echoes the stories of Sarah, Rebecca, and Elizabeth, women who suffered the shame and disappointment of not being able to bear children. We need to remember, in the ancient world, barrenness was a terrible fate. If a woman could not produce children, she had not fulfilled her purpose. She had no security, no status, no honour or dignity. But God's pattern is to work through the impossible to prove that He is the only true God. So the angel of the Lord visits Manoa's wife and tells her she will give birth to a son who will be set apart for the Lord, dedicated to God from the womb. The Nazarite vow is explained in number 6. A man who wanted to dedicate himself for the Lord for a period of time, usually to ask God's help or blessing at a crucial time in his life, he would make a Nazarite vow. He would abstain from wine or any other produce from the vine. He would be careful not to go near a dead body because that would make him ceremonially unclean and unable to be in God's presence. And he would not cut his hair during that time. So you could tell from the length of a man's hair how long his vow lasted. This was a voluntary vow undertaken for a fixed period of time. But Samson's Nazarite vow is unique in that it starts while he is in his mother's womb. Even his mother must abstain from the fruit of the vine and keep away from anything unclean, so she won't defile him while he is inside her. The other thing that is different about this Nazarite vow is that it's not for the purpose of personal or individual blessing. Rather, it is directly linked to Israel's deliverance. God's people have sinned against him, and deliverance can only come through one who has been chosen by God and set apart for him. Verse 5 tells us something else that is significant about Samson's role as deliverer. The other judges God raised were the instruments he used to deliver the Israelites from their oppressor. But Samson will not do that fully. He will take the lead in delivering Israel from the hands of the Philistines. But their deliverance won't be complete through him. Another translation says, "He shall begin to save Israel from the hands of the Philistines." Samson is the final judge for Israel, but he will not be the final deliverer. He will begin to save Israel from the Philistines, but someone else will finish that job. And we know that's David. Samson will bring about a partial deliverance, and he will point beyond the time of the judges to the monarchy. David will be the one to fully deliver Israel from the Philistines. But even David will not bring ultimate peace to Israel. He will defeat their enemies, but he will not deliver them from sin or its consequences. David's rule will be stained by his own sin. He will not be the deliverer who brings lasting peace. But there will be a deliverer from his line who will bring complete salvation. One will come who will save his people not just from their physical enemies, but from their sins. Samson points forward to David, and he points through David to Christ. And while Samson is a fatally flawed judge, he will break the Nazarite vow in every way. There are aspects of his life that foreshadow Christ's, and we're going to see that over the next 3 weeks. In this chapter, we see how his birth sets the pattern for the birth of Jesus. First, his birth is announced by an angel. Second, he will be born to a woman who is unable to conceive. And third, he will be set apart for God from birth to be the rescuer of his people. In these 3 ways, his birth points forward to the birth of Christ. One way in which Samson's birth story is different to that of Jesus is that Samson's birth brought honour and dignity to his mother. The shame of having no children was removed from her. For Mary, however, Jesus' birth brought dishonour and disgrace, and that would set the pattern for his life and death. Suspicion in place of celebration, rejection rather than rejoicing, desertion rather than devotion, and grief instead of glory. But there is one more similarity between Samson's birth story and that of Christ's, and that is in how his mother responds to the announcement. We see in verses 6 and 7 that she tells her husband everything the angel has told her, and there is no hint of disbelief. In that sense, unlike Abraham's wife Sarah, who laughed in disbelief when her son was prophesied, this woman's response foreshadows that of Mary. When the angel Gabriel told Mary that despite being a virgin, she would conceive and give birth to a deliverer, she replied, "I am the Lord's servant. May your word to me be fulfilled." This is faith, believing the word of God and submitting to it, regardless of the cost. When Manoa's wife reports what has happened to her husband, she repeats word for word everything he tells her, but with one addition. She says in verse 7, "The boy will be a Nazarite of God from the womb until the day of his death." Now, in one sense, she's making the natural assumption that if the boy is to be set apart to God from birth, if he is to be an instrument of deliverance, he will be set apart all his life until the day he dies. But in another sense, she is prophesying, because the deliverance Samson brings will be through his death. Like Jesus, he will have to die to secure the deliverance of his people. And so despite the many ways in which we will see he is unlike Jesus, Samson's life will in some significant ways foreshadow and point forward to him. Well, let's pick up the story in verse 8. Then Manoa prayed to the Lord, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I beg you to let the man of God you sent to us come again to teach us how to bring up the boy who is to be born." God heard Manoa, and the angel of God came again to the woman while she was out in the field, but her husband Manoa was not with her. The woman hurried to tell her husband, "He's here, the man who appeared to me the other day." Manoa got up and followed his wife. When he came to the man, he said, "Are you the man who talked to my wife?" "I am," he said. So Manoa asked him, "When your words are fulfilled, what is to be the rule that governs the boy's life and work?" The angel of the Lord answered, "Your wife must do all that I have told her. She must not eat anything that comes from the grapevine, nor drink any wine or other fermented drink, nor eat anything unclean. She must do everything I have commanded her." Some people argue that Manoa shows either a mistrust of his wife or a lack of faith in asking God to send the angel again. But I'm not sure we can make that assumption from the text. It may be that because a woman's word didn't count for much in those days, he wanted to hear for himself what the angel had to say. Or it may be that he just wanted the opportunity to ask for more details. And I think most of us can relate to that. We struggle to trust fully when we don't have all the information. And I think that's probably what's behind Manoa's prayer. So Manoa prays and God is gracious. The angel of the Lord returns. Again, he comes to the woman first. I don't think there's anything to read into that, except that it perhaps points to the significant role women will play in Samson's life. It also shows that despite their lack of status in that culture, God values women, whether they have children or not. And that's something we would do well to remember. All women have dignity, honour and value because they are made in God's image, regardless of their ability or opportunity to bear children. So the angel returns, but he doesn't have any new information for Manoa. He just repeats what he has already said to his wife. Manoa has to learn that he must obey God fully, even when he doesn't have all the answers to his questions. What he thinks he needs is different to what God knows he needs. But he tries again. Verse 15, Manoa said to the angel of the Lord, "We would like you to stay until we prepare a young goat for you." The angel of the Lord replied, "Even though you detain me, I will not eat any of your food. But if you prepare a burnt offering, offer it to the Lord." Manoa did not realize that it was the angel of the Lord. So in this culture, to feed someone is to try to establish some kind of relationship with them. A shared meal would demonstrate peace between the participants. It would obligate them to one another in some way. But the angel of the Lord will not eat with Manoa. There is no peace between the Lord and Israel at this time. And the angel will not be in Manoa's debt. He will not be coerced into giving any information. Verse 17, then Manoa inquired of the angel of the Lord, "What is your name, so that we may honour you when your word comes true?" He replied, "Why do you ask my name? It is beyond understanding." In this culture, a name told you something about a person. It gave an indication of their character. So when the angel says, "My name is beyond your understanding," he reveals that he is speaking as the Lord. He's saying, "You can't possibly understand who I am. I am so much greater than you can imagine. And you can't control me. I am the one in charge." The only response to such a revelation is worship. Manoa sacrifices a goat and a grain offering, and the Lord does something amazing. Verse 20, as the flame blazed up from the altar towards heaven, the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame. Seeing this, Manoa and his wife fell with their faces to the ground. When the angel of the Lord did not show himself again to Manoa and his wife, Manoa realized that it was the angel of the Lord. Manoa asks for information, but the Lord gives him something greater. He gives him what he really needs, not rules, but revelation. If Manoa and his wife are to bring up this boy in the way God intends, they need to know God. They need a revelation of who he is, his power, his greatness. And this is true for us too. Like Manoa, we think what we need is information and explanations. We want God to tell us exactly what's going on and what we must do. But what we really need is a revelation of who God is. We need to know that he is great and he is good and he is awesome and holy and glorious. Our trust and obedience doesn't spring from us having the answers, but from knowing the one who does. Well, Manoa panics after this revelation. In verse 22, he says, "We are doomed to die. We have seen God." Now, on the one level, this response makes sense. Exodus 33:20 says no one can see God and live. But Manoah's wife is wise. She says in verse 23, "If the Lord had meant to kill us, he would not have accepted a burnt offering and grain offering from our hands, nor shown us all these things, or now told us this." She understands God has not come to destroy, but to save. He has come to a people who have not cried out for him, a people who do not deserve him, and a people who without him will be destroyed by the Philistines. He has not come in judgment, but in mercy. He has come to seek and to save those who are hopelessly and dangerously lost without him. He has come to deliver. She has great faith. And God keeps his word. Verse 24, the woman gave birth to a boy and named him Samson. The chapter ends expectantly. Samson's birth brings hope for Manoa and his wife and for all Israel. Just as the birth of the one he foreshadows brings hope to the whole world. We'll see next week that Samson will not live up to expectations. He will fail to be the man he was set apart to be. But we have a perfect deliverer in Jesus, one who reveals God to us, and one who has brought not partial but complete salvation from our greatest enemies. So let's look to him, trust in him, and worship him this week.